Well, as it turns out, you're not supposed to use the word Wendigo anymore. You're not supposed to say it. You're not supposed to have the creature in your stories or your comics or your movies or anything like that. You're not supposed to draw Wendigos. You're not supposed to say the word Wendigo because apparently it is not. It's not yours. You're not allowed to have it. That's right. Recently, I heard that the Native American tradition, the Native American legend of the Wendigo, which is sort of like a cannibal spirit, for lack of a better term, just simplified. You're not supposed to use that if you're not Native American. And even if you are Native American, you're not supposed to say it because it invites bad spirits and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, all respect to people of all religions, of all beliefs, of all faiths, you know, whatever it may be. But I mean, come on. It's like saying you can't use angels in things because they're part of, you know, the lore of Christianity. You can't use Muhammad in that's a bad example. You can't use vampires because that's Eastern European folklore and it's not yours. That you can't use the Loch Ness monster because that belongs exclusively to Scotland. Now, this is just my personal POV. I am not a Native American person, to my knowledge. I don't know. I don't know a lot of what I am. This is just my opinion as an outsider, as an evil, horrible, disgusting, bigoted person who thinks that made-up things aren't important. But that said, I do respect the idea that there are certain people who feel very deeply about this issue. And I'm talking about people who are Native American by lineage. I'm not talking about white-ass motherfuckers who are getting offended on behalf of other people. I'm talking about the actual people with a legitimate cause to be concerned. So out of respect for people who are actually Native American, who do actually have a problem with this being taken from them, because laugh as you will about cultural appropriation as a term, some people don't believe it exists at all, whatever. I understand. I understand. You have something that's part of your identity, you have something that's part of your history, and you don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry to just turn it into merchandise. You know, corporatize it, essentially. Mass produce Funko Pops of, you know, your legendary mythical characters that are, you know, passed down by your ancestors. I understand that to a large extent. So regardless of whether or not I personally have any reverence for Wendigos, despite the fact I am more than willing to say the word Wendigo repeatedly, even though I'm not supposed to, you know, we all have our own positions on things, and I respect other people's positions on it. So to that end, I wanted to ask the question, in a post-Wendigo world, what do we do now? In around 2013, I wrote a creepypasta, an online horror fiction story, a fear fic, called Passing Through. In that story, I wrote about a creature that would take on attributes of other creatures that it ate. So, for example, if it happened to scarf down a hummingbird, the creature might develop a long, flicking tongue like a hummingbird. If the creature happened to chow down on a deer, you know, it might develop like deer antlers, you know, that type of thing. Now, as a concept, this was essentially just a jumbled mix of animal parts, because the more creatures this thing ate, the more it changed, and the more it developed, the more it evolved. The story, of course, culminated with the revelation that the creature had eaten a person, and by virtue of doing this, also had the thoughts and memories of that person up until the point it digested that person. So back then, about a decade ago, I wrote a story in which we had an amalgamation creature that took on the appearances, that took on the attributes of various other animals it had eaten, including humans. And when it devoured something or someone, it had, you know, essentially the thoughts and memories of that being for as long as it took to digest what it had eaten. Nearly a decade later, in one of my short story books, you'll find a story called Preservation. That story is told from the perspective of a young girl who is staying with her mother while her mother works in a veterinary office. And one night, one clandestine, stormy night, one mysterious, dark, and foggy night, some rangers from the local state park bring a very strange animal to the veterinarian, and sort of without saying much, with a lot of secrecy, they have the veterinarian work on this animal that has been shot and injured. As it turns out, in this story, spoilers ahead, the creature that they bring is a jackalope. Now, this was a story that I wrote sort of to challenge myself, because I thought, what is the worst cryptid? What is the cryptid that nobody takes seriously? What is a cryptid that is kind of a joke, and started out as a joke, and has always been, just a silly hoax? And can I turn that cryptid into something interesting? Can I repurpose it into a new format? So I created the story, and I came up with the idea of a jackalope-type creature that had the attributes of sort of like a humanoid deer mixed with, rabbit features, like, long ears, legs made for leaping great distances, the antlers, different stuff like that. So essentially this was a way for me to challenge myself and say, can I take an otherwise lame cryptid, or one that people would consider lame, and turn it into something interesting? So now I want to do a little bit of a thought experiment with you. What if we combined those two stories? What if the legend of the jackalope, instead of being concocted by a taxidermist and his brother in the 1930s, what if that actually came from these creatures that take on the different attributes of other animals that they eat? What if the jackalope, all along, this cryptid that nobody cares about, what if that actually was secretly pretty fucking metal? So to that end, I've come up with the idea of repurposing the legend, the hoax, the myth of the jackalope as a replacement for the Wendigo. Now, we're not just going to take the Native American legend of the Wendigo and say, we're going to change the name of it, so now it's different, now you don't own it. No, we're not going to do like an Asylum Pictures mockbuster version of the Wendigo. What we're going to do is we're going to take all of the things that were put onto Wendigos by pop culture that aren't part of the original legend, and we're going to use those. So, you've seen Wendigos depicted with antlers, right? That's not part of the original legend. We're going to take certain aspects that were put onto Wendigos by various horror authors, and we're going to apply those back to the jackalope. Now, the name jackalope, I understand that that's kind of a silly name, but honestly, I kind of love it, because it's a silly name that we can repurpose and give some weight to. Like, this is a challenge to every writer out there. Can you write a horror story that makes a jackalope frightening? And if you can't, are you actually a good horror author? So let me lay out the idea I have for how to repurpose the jackalope to replace a Wendigo, but not actually just be a Wendigo under a different name, okay? So we're going to set up some rules, we're going to set up some themes. We're essentially going to create our own OC in this video. The legend of the jackalope comes from mysterious forest beings, cryptids, essentially like Bigfoot, the Chupacabra, Jersey Devil, different inexplicable cryptids that sort of are out there on the periphery, just beyond the tree line. This is one of those unclassified, unknown creatures that is just out there in the woods. And the process by which these creatures operate would be this. The jackalope eats other animals, takes on the attributes of those animals, but the more the jackalope eats, the more the jackalope consumes, the more it decays and the more it rots. Now this brings in the sort of modern day vision of what a Wendigo might look like, with the antlers, but with also like a skull and like exposed ribs and like bone. Sort of looking like, something that's been rotting out in the woods. Again, this is something that I don't believe is part of the original Wendigo lore, this sort of like zombie-like decaying appearance. So as a jackalope consumes other creatures, it decays quicker and decays more, becomes more visibly zombie-like. When a jackalope eventually consumes so much that it dies, that it rots, that it falls apart, that it collapses under its own weight, then the corpse of that creature is feasted upon by scavengers. So let's say you have a dead jackalope rotting out in the woods, its body, laying there festering away, and you've got, a possum comes by, eats some of it. You got some, rats that eat, a little bit here and there. You get a bear that comes by and, bites off a piece. Essentially, that jackalope has just reproduced because all of those creatures that ate a little bit here and there, nommed little bits of the creature, all of those scavengers start to become jackalopes. They start to transform. They start to take on the attributes of other creatures that they eat, and the process continues. Now, what will happen with the jackalopes is that they will pursue more highly evolved creatures as they continue. So eventually, down the line, pretty much every jackalope is going to eventually end up looking for, human beings and, sort of like having a taste, for the higher, more evolved creatures. This leads to jackalopes, as previously mentioned, having the memories and thoughts of the people they eat for a certain period of time until they're digested, meaning that jackalopes have a natural tendency, after they eat a human being, to know where the rest of the campsite is, to know where the other people are that person knew, and they begin stalking those people and trying to consume them as well. And all the while, as they continue eating, they rot more and more. I think it's pretty metal. I think it's a pretty fucking awesome idea. Now, I won't go too much more into, lore or, the details of the rules or, they can't do this or they can do that. And I'll leave it to different authors and different creators to create their own iterations. Hell, maybe there are some crazy people out there who think that the jackalope actually spawns from, I don't know, mineral springs that are rarely occurring out in the wilderness and that, are there one moment and vanish the next. And those springs, by golly, those springs are the fountain of youth, the fabled fountain of youth. And these people who believe in the jackalope, they, try to seek out the jackalopes and they try to seek out this source of their power, and they become like a cult. And I don't know, there's any number of things you could do with this. And none of it has to even necessarily be canon or even necessarily be quote-unquote true to the creature and to its legend. You can write whatever. You could have people who think that the jackalope's origins, are in these, mineral springs. You could have people who think that the jackalope's origins are, demons from hell, like every other fucking thing ever created. Whatever you want to do with it. And at the end of the day, of course, probably nobody will take me up on this, nobody will accept the challenge, and people will do, fuck all with what I've laid out here. But that's alright, because it's, sort of a fun thought experiment, and it's something that I wanted to do. The best thing about this iteration of the jackalope, this original character, this OC, with the same name as the old hoax, is that it's free to use. All of my stories and work that I post online for free is under a Creative Commons license, an NC by SA license. Non-commercial, properly attributed, and anything released has to be under the same license as, my original work. And of course I always, work with people. If somebody contacts me and says, I'd like to use something of yours, can we discuss, the license or, change something about it? I'm more than willing to, talk to people and figure things out. So, again, free to use. It's not tied to any sort of folklore of any group of people you don't belong to, and it's not, corporately owned. So, there you go, folks, the jackalope. You are free to use that, and absolutely nobody can fucking complain.